The Unbecoming of Belinda Blackwell. There are few places Belinda Blackwell likes to lay down to rest more than upon her husband's chest. He hadn't been expecting her. Belinda hadn't been expecting to be home so soon, either, what with the unpredictability of her father's illness demanding open schedules from his children, someone on call at all times lest the old man die without one of them there to hold his hand. When Oscar had come to join him a week early, something about a case closing timely and a stiffening in his shoulders when Belinda inquired about her sister-in-law, she pounced on the opportunity to bid her brother and father adieu and return early to the husband she so desperately missed. Finding Etienne still tangled in their bed covers, she had stripped down to her chemise and crawled atop him slowly. He had thrashed hard upon stirring and finding her there, his eyes foggy with confusion and fright, but she had kissed his face and rubbed his arms, whispering, "It's me, it's only me," until he relaxed back into the sheets. Now they rest quietly, teetering on the line between half asleep and half awake, Belinda's ear pressed to Etienne's chest to hear the steady thump, thump, thump of his heart. "Well, I'm glad Oscar will be with him," Etienne says appeasingly, having listened in silence to her stories from London. I think it will do him as much good as father. He seemed like he could use some time away." "Away from what? I'm not sure." Belinda plays with a loose thread on Etienne's nightshirt. "I feel bad saying away from his wife, but all signs point to it being the truth. He seemed uncomfortable when I brought her up, but he wouldn't tell me anything specific." Etienne's hand tightens where it rests on the nape of her neck. "Then I hope that time will serve them both well." "I do, too." She tilts her head to observe the strong profile of her husband's nose. "And you?" she teases, "has time away from me served you well?" "All I managed to accomplish was missing my wife." He tucks his chin to look down at her. "Though I have been doing some research in your absence." "Yes, I've noticed." The entire walk to their chambers was an obstacle course of books and journals on every tabletop and cast aside in the middle of the hallway like he had thrown them down as he was walking. And before that, there was the cook coming to greet her in the foyer with concerns of her husband's increasingly strange demands while Belinda was away, his supposed need for rabbit hearts and pitchers of salt water, bunches of fresh rosemary left to dry on the windowsill for exactly 36 hours, and demands of her and the housemaid to not disturb him when his doors are closed, certain tasks he'd undertaken where it was vital he not be interrupted. For the sake of goodwill, she gave them both the rest of the morning off. Belinda knows of her husband's beliefs, glimpses into a world of ritual and wardship, studies of augury and communion and necromancy that he prefers she not get too close to. Etienne shifts underneath her, and she reads discomfort in his movements. She strokes a hand down his cheek so he knows not to be ashamed of it all on her behalf. "What has prompted it? Have I come to see you while I was gone?" He's told her, too, of the spirit that haunts him, the one that looks just like her, that follows him around the house and watches him from doorways and windows and stares at him unblinking, stares at him like he's done something unforgivable. Belinda has never seen herself, and Etienne claims the spirit has never appeared while she's in the house. She fretted for days over having to leave him when word of her father's illness arrived, knowing what it might invite back into Etienne's life, but there was no getting around the trip, and besides, Etienne had sworn his confidence that that time was behind them. It would appear that he'd spoken too soon. His eyebrows tick up at the middle, like he's attempting to contain his emotion. "I thought it was over," he whispers. "It's been so long. I feel like a fool, letting my guard down as I have been." A deep ache swells behind Belinda's ribcage. She squeezes Etienne tighter. "You've been happy. It's not foolish to hope. What have you found?" "There is a ritual, one for banishment. I have been completing the prerequisite steps over the past week." "Oh?" Belinda struggles to understand. "Yes. There is only one step left to do. It won't be easy." His fingers flex against her back, a signal that he is thinking hard. He seems to choose his words carefully. "The act won't be physically challenging, but I fear the toll it will have on my heart and constitution." Belinda frowns. "It sounds taxing. Are you sure this is the only way?" She considers, not for the first time, bringing up the possibility of relocation, abandoning this home that torments him so in favor of a fresh start, a life away from paranoia and body doubles she can't see. Before she can muster up the right words, he's saying, "It will be worth it. I want to do it. I want my Belinda to be the only Belinda in my life." She smothers a grin against the column of his throat. "I'd quite like that as well." Etienne is quiet for a long moment before speaking again. I won't pretend it isn't terrible. But it is necessary, too. I want my wife to have a good life, and I need to be better to give one to her. I need to be rid of this. A strong rush of affection surges through Belinda. Oh, she loves this man something awful. She'd follow him into hell. Then you will be brave. And you will be successful. She rises and falls with the depth of Etienne's answering sigh. You sound so much like her, he mutters. Like who? She asks. Like Belinda. Belinda's thumb falters where it was rubbing a soothing path along his collarbone. What? A giggle bubbles out of her, confusion mingling with sleepy amusement. It's uncanny. You've never been this good before. He doesn't seem to register her stiffening, or he does and ignores it. You've never come to me like this, lay upon me like this. You must know what I'm going to do. Etienne. It won't work. Etienne raises his voice, speaking over her. I won't let it. Belinda lifts her head to look her husband in the eyes. A coldness cracks through her when she sees the resolution in his face. Etienne. I don't. Her voice breaks off into a scared whisper. It's me. He shakes his head. My wife knows me better than this. She tells me when to expect her. You've misjudged. I know you're not really her this time. Belinda curses her attempt at being romantic. He thinks she's haunting him, not surprising him. She's never been so near him when he's in the middle of one of these supposed spectral visits. It's sobering. It's frightening. She tries to sit up, and grunts when Etienne uses his hand on her neck to ease her back down again. His hold is strong, not enough to hurt, but in her shock, she goes easy. Etienne's mouth is at her ear. My wife is not to be home for a few days yet. By then, all of this will be dealt with and done. It will be like it never happened. She won't have any part of it. She will not have such a weak, nervous husband. His voice shakes. I will keep her safe. It's all the warning Belinda gets before the knife is plunged into her back. She jerks violently. Pain whips through her, fast and brutal. It's like someone has dumped a full basin of water over her. No. The sensation is real and it's not water, it's blood, hot and wet and slick and spreading fast, sticking her chemise to her skin. She frantically shoves herself up, grappling for a place on her back she can't reach, too low for the arm she stretches over her shoulder, too high for the one she stretches under. She arches, incapacitated by the pain, her mouth opening and closing like a fish thrown onto rocks, gasping into air that isn't helping her situation, feeling inches from death. The knife digs into her shifting skin, or is her skin digging into the knife? The awful, writhing, soaring sensation ripping through her. She's never been stabbed before, but this cannot be normal. Flashes of rabbit hearts and salt come to her, and no, of course this isn't normal. Not by Etienne's design. She hunches, trying to scramble away from the pain, but there's nowhere to go that it doesn't follow. She shoves her face into the pillow beside her husband's stunned face, her hands fisting at the sheets. Etienne grips her hips tight. Belinda? She can only answer with a whimper. She's trembling so hard she can barely open her mouth anymore for how hard her teeth chatter. No. Etienne pushes against her shoulders. She doesn't understand what he wants. She doesn't understand what's happening. Dear God. No. His touch moves to her face, and he wrenches her head back with his hands shoved up into her hair. Belinda. He jams his fingers under her jaw, ignoring her choking, feeling for something. Upon finding it, his face goes white. Belinda. Again, more urgently, wrestling to sit them both upright. Belinda. It's all coming to her in flashes, the horrible red smear on Etienne's cheek, the wetness that's dripping down the back of her legs, the sudden realization that she can't support herself. She slumps against Etienne. Dazedly, she thinks of her parents, of all the men they'd wanted her to marry. A parade of surgeons and doctors with their deep pockets and upturned noses. Professionals who would know what to do with a gaping wound, professionals she had rejected for the love of a poet, her poet, who had nothing to offer but a quiet life and endless adoration. Etienne cradles her against him, rocking him back and forth. He's sobbing. Why are you here? You weren't supposed to be here. I thought you were the specter. Please believe me. Oh God, please forgive me. He sounds wrecked. Belinda wants to comfort him, but she can't pick her head up. Then darkness clouds her vision, and she can't do anything at all anymore. Belinda blinks awake. The ground is uncomfortable beneath her back. What is she doing on the ground? Etienne is kneeling by her side, head in his hands. There's something red all over his hands. Belinda pushes herself up, reaching out to touch Etienne's knee. He jolts at the barest brush of her fingers. Belinda. He sounds relieved. He yanks her forward and she goes crashing against his chest. Why is his heart beating so fast? That red substance on his hands is getting all over her now, staining her crisp white chemise. Why does it smell so strongly of metal? Her head feels fuzzy. Really? Why is she on the ground? A moment ago, she was laying in bed, gossiping with Etienne about her brother's marriage. Did she fall out of bed? Did she hit her head? Is that why everything feels so off? I'm sorry, she murmurs slowly. I'm not sure what happened. Did I fall? Etienne is shaking. She must have really scared him. I fixed it. It's all right. Fixed what? How long was I out? It doesn't matter. You're all right. It's all right now. Belinda frowns. Etienne, is my head bleeding? He winces. What? Why are you asking me that? Blood. She can't think of anything else to say. She should get a cloth, something to clean him with. She pushes away from him, bracing against the edge of the mattress to stand. Her hand sinks into something cold and wet. Before she can search for the source of it, Etienne pitches forward, grabbing her by the cheeks and pulling her to look back at him. It makes her head spin. Don't look, he says. He sounds gravely serious. Belinda's heart stutters. What? Don't look. Like a petulant child, Belinda can't stop herself. She's wriggling out of his grip before he can stop her again, ignoring his cry, turning to look at herself laying dead in a mess of blood on the bed. Herself. On the bed. Blood. All air leaves her. She jerks to her feet, stumbling backwards. She can't look away. She's just laying there, her hair stuck to her forehead and her chemise soaked through with red. Her eyes are still open. Behind her, Etienne remains on the ground. His voice is low, thick with grief. There was an accident. I did what I had to fix it. What? Her voice sounds like it's coming from miles away. She doesn't even know what to ask. She can't look away. I didn't know if it would work. I had only read about the ritual. I've never attempted it, but the journals said I could comb through time and bring something back with me. He looks up. I brought you. Belinda's stomach turns. Etienne's face is wet with tears. Where is she? You brought me. From the past? From before the accident? Yes. It was the only way. You were already gone. His voice breaks, and he hangs his head. His shoulders are shaking. Belinda looks at him. She looks at herself. But what of the Etienne in the past? Are you the same as him? Our paths have diverged, he says gravely. Well, then, what of that Etienne? Is he all alone now? How must he feel, having just had his wife taken from him? Etienne shudders, his eyes darkening. I know how he feels. For some reason, that's what does Belinda in. Her stomach lurches and she stumbles to the lavatory, shoving the door closed behind her before retching into the sink. Nothing comes up. It makes her feel worse. She looks up into the mirror. Yes, that's her face staring back at her with wide eyes and tangled hair. But yes, that was her face, too, staring back at her from the bed. It feels like dying just to think of it. She can't imagine what dying must really feel like, can't imagine how anything can be worse than this terror that's seizing her insides. Etienne's voice comes from the other side of the door, muffled and pleading. Please, I didn't want this. All I wanted was you. He nudges at the door, like a dog desperate to get in. She staggers over to open it. Etienne is still on his knees, still on the ground. When the door is open wide enough, he drags himself forward with his fingernails digging into the wood floor. He bends low to kiss her ankles. She closes her eyes tight at the sensation. My love, my life. His tears drip onto her foot. I wish I hadn't done it. I wish I hadn't done it. What did you do? A voice in her head begs her to ask. And somewhere deeper, somewhere darker, somewhere inside her that already knows, somewhere she can't reach, is asking, which part do you regret? They bury Belinda in the garden. Belinda watches numbly while Etienne strips that other her from the bloody chemise, redressing her in something soft and clean. He gathers her hair and fastens it into a braid to keep it off her face, and his touch is so gentle and reverential that this time when Belinda excuses herself to retch into the sink, she throws up the entire contents of her stomach. Belinda gets dressed herself, tugging on a gown, though her hands shake so hard that Etienne has to help her with the fastenings. She follows behind Etienne and stares at her own face, lax where it rests against their husband's shoulder as he carries her down the stairs and out the back door. Is that what she looks like when she sleeps? They leave the bloody mattress as it is, for the housemaid to find. We'll say you were with child, Etienne had said, not meeting her gaze. They won't ask questions if they believe you lost something. Etienne is right, as he tends to be. When Belinda retires inside hours later, the silent vigil over the little upturned patch of dirt beneath her favorite tree becoming too much for her to bear, the housemaid, Miss Clark, is already waiting for her, wringing her hands in the hallway. All it takes is just enough performance of Belinda's averted eyes and a hand pressed to her stomach for Miss Clark's face to drop. She coos sympathetically, fussing over Belinda so tenderly that Belinda is weeping before she can hold herself back. We buried her in the garden, Belinda croaks. All by yourselves, Ma'am? Miss Clark asks, sounding surprised. We couldn't bear to leave her, Belinda says, and now she's telling the truth. Then, she tells another. I don't know what happened. Belinda looks out from their bedchamber, trying to ignore the sharp smell of vinegar and lemon, the bed stripped of its linens behind her, the way the mattress has been flipped. She watches Etienne as the sky goes from blue to orange. Hours pass and still he remains, bent over the grave of his dead wife while his wife watches over him. After what feels like an eternity, he rises, stretching his arms. He turns, shielding his eyes against the setting sun to look back up at the house. Belinda tries not to notice how he flinches when he spots her, feeling like a specter in the window. 5. With a heavy heart the world turns. The king's carriage slowly rumbled along the cobbled stones, its heavy frame creaking and groaning each time a wheel found an unevenly set stone. All around, hooves clattered along in a deluge of clonks and thumps as the mounted king's guard shouted orders at the crowd that had formed before the execution stage. Their words were muffled by the heavy windows and thick walls of the carriage's velvet-adorned closed cabin. I do not want to watch, Avon whined and crossed his arms. His eyes avoided his father, King Aldrain, who sat across from him on a red velvet cushion fashionably trimmed and embroidered with cloth of gold. Nervously, Avon clutched at his trousers and crumpled handfuls of the soft black fabric within his fists. The king wore a raven black long coat over a ruffled white chemise. A bejeweled ring adorned each finger, and the haughty necklace that rested upon his broad shoulders and proud chest was of heavy gold beset with rubies, emeralds, and opals. Atop his head, above a white-flecked black beard, bushy but meticulously maintained, and stern brown eyes, sat the crown of Pandamore, a hunk of finely worked gold even more lavish than all the king's other adornments combined. He sat with his legs crossed, his black pants neatly pressed and tucked into knee-high boots of supple black leather. Across his lap lay a golden scepter, its bulbous end ringed with diamonds between two halos of silver. I know, son, but watch you will. You're 9 years old. It is past time you begin learning the hardships of what it means to be king. He sighed gently. I get no joy from watching the execution of my own subjects, for each execution is my own failure. And it is my duty to observe the results of those failures. And, as my only heir, it is your duty as well, for one day the throne will be yours. The king leaned back. For the first time, the prince noticed the weariness behind those sharp eyes. Now, open the window. There's a good lad. It is important to hear each charge as it is read. Avon watched the hangman test the fallaway floor below the gallows from which hung 2 nooses, menacing in the morning's glow. Just to the right, sitting on a wooden stool behind a chopping block, a shirtless man who wore over his head a black hood with holes for his eyes worked his massive axe with a whetstone. The sound carried harshly through the eerie silence that had fallen outside the carriage. How many? Avon asked quietly. The king's gaze did not shift from the stage. 6. Avon watched as the first man was led onto the stage, his arms bound behind his back by iron shackles. He was an older man, slender and hunched, with a weathered face and a hooked nose. A scowl further creased his wrinkled skin, and his dark eyes briefly wandered over the crowd before coming to rest on the chopping block towards which he was led. He spat on the ground but said nothing and did not struggle. "The charge is murder during a robbery," announced the guardsman who had led the man to the chopping block. The moment the guardsman stepped clear of the man, the executioner approached with his axe and cleaved the man's head off with a fluid swoop. The axe made a thud as it bit into the chopping block, and the man's head fell into a waiting basket. The body and head were promptly removed by waiting guardsmen. Avon's heart pounded and bile rose into his throat, but he swallowed it down. Briefly he looked to his father, but his father's gaze did not waver from the stage, his expression stern, his eyes transfixed. The next 4 individuals, each charged with thievery, had been easier for Avon to watch. Their deaths had been instant as their own weight broke their necks, except for one smaller man who kicked and squirmed, but he stilled quickly enough. Avon wiped away tears but steeled his resolve and spared another quick glance at his father as preparations for the final man continued. The crown suddenly looked as heavy as a boulder. Is this what it means to be king? The final individual, a remarkably small cloaked figure, was led onto the stage. Avon sat up as the cloak was removed, revealing a small girl with a wild red mane. She looked at the carriage with sharp green eyes, but her face carried the blank expression of one who had resigned oneself to an inevitable and imminent demise. The charge of thievery was announced again as adjustments were made to the rope to accommodate the girl's small stature. Avon's heart raced. He clutched his chest as though his heart would burst. He recognized her. She had been around the other peasant children several times when he had escaped the confines of the palace to meander the streets. She had even once played a game with him. She hadn't spoken a word, but her movements were quick and nimble, and she had quickly won all the coin he had brought. "Father," Avon yelped abruptly, tears already beginning to stream down his cheeks, "stop this." His mind worked quickly, searching for a reason to give to his father. Surely, explaining that he had lost money to the girl when he had sneaked out of the palace would do nothing but ensure he was whipped upon their return. A crime is a crime, even at your age. Shall we allow her to grow into a better and bolder thief like the others? Perhaps graduate to murder, like the first man you saw, for a handful of silver? Avon refused to accept this answer. Still crying, he bared his teeth and scowled in anger. "You will stop this. I demand it." He spat. The king's cheeks flushed. With imperceptible speed he leaned forward and struck Avon across the face with a powerful slap. "You will not speak out of line to me." The king settled back into his seat, his rage-hardened eyes returned to the stage. Avon looked back to the stage as the guardsman led the small girl to the noose to be fitted. He looked to the carriage door, but his father would have him by the collar before he could get the door ajar. It was heavy, after all, and lay halfway between them. But there was a wide-open window right in front of him. In a fluid motion, the movements practiced and honed by his play in the city chasing and being chased by other children, Avon grabbed the window's edge with both hands, hopped onto the seat cushion, and launched himself through. Behind him he heard his father yell. Avon hit the ground on all fours and rolled through the momentum on his shoulder. The heavy impact of his shoulder on stone came as a jarring shock of pain mixed with numbness, but it did not slow him. He charged the stage. The girl watched him approach with wondering eyes, the noose already secured around her neck. The hangman, unaware that someone approached, moved lackadaisically towards the wooden handle that would engage the fallaway floor. The guardsmen, upon seeing the prince approaching, hesitated and looked at one another. It was enough of a lapse for Avon to hop onto a barrel and leap onto the stage. Not once since he left the carriage did he stop moving. The hangman's hand gripped the wooden handle as Avon approached the girl. His ceremonial short sword screamed from its scabbard as he leapt and arced the blade just over the girl's head. It sliced through the aged rope cleanly enough to sever it in one blow. Before his feet could meet the floor beneath himself and the girl, it gave way, and they both dropped. The sword flew from his hand as he thrashed in the air, turning from his belly to his back. He landed with a thud, and the wind left his lungs. He gasped for air as his vision blurred. Before he could think to move, another form fell onto him, and the world turned black. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Avon awoke in his bed, a nurse and doctor at his side. Then he noticed his father, watching him from his perch upon a chair against the far wall by the window. Dim light spilled through, illuminating the stone chamber of his bedroom with a faint glow, and the soft rain pattered against the window's panes. What happened? Avon wondered, barely able to form the question in his mind. Everything was fuzzy, and his head pounded. His father simply watched, unmoving. The doctor and nurse began poking and prodding and asking questions. It wasn't long before his vision returned, but his head continued to pound. What? Avon began. Before he could finish the question, the events began to come back to him in short flashes. The executions. The girl. The fall. The girl. Avon tried to sit up, but the doctor restrained him. Remain still, Prince Avon, the doctor said gently. The girl. Avon managed to whisper in a raspy voice. The girl, he said more loudly, could have been the death of you. The king scolded gently as he rose to his feet and took 2 long strides towards the bed. But she lives, and for now fares better than you. For now. Relieved, Avon relaxed and let himself sink into the pillows. Rest now, the king said after a brief, hushed exchange with the doctor. Punishment later. And with that he left, his crimson robes flowing behind him. He did not look back as he exited the room. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Avon started when he saw the red-haired girl chained to the dungeon pillar, her bared back to them. She sat on her heels, her face pressed against the cold, grimy stone. Already she had been lashed several times. Illuminated by the torchlight, crimson streaks of blood glistened as they trickled from the wicked slashes left by the leather whip held by a nearby guardsman. You will deliver the final 4 lashes, the king said to Avon. Then I will decide her fate. The king took the whip from the guardsman and thrust it into Avon's arms. Avon thrust the whip back into his father's arms. I will not, he spat defiantly. The outburst sent a twinge of pain through his still bandaged head, but he ignored it. Very well, the king said. Then you will take her place. And the punishment will restart at 1. He nodded to the guardsman. Avon looked at his father wide-eyed, but the expression on his father's face was serious and unamused. The girl was unshackled and moved aside by a guardsman. She sank to her hands and knees at his feet, sobbing quietly. Avon took her place. Shortly after his shirt was removed and the shackles attached to his wrists, the lashings began. He screamed in agony each time, and tears streamed down his face. But he would not give his father the satisfaction of hearing him plead or whine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just when he thought one more lashing would have him screaming for mercy, he felt arms wrap around his body. Red hair spilled onto his shoulder. A sobbing form clung to his back. Enough, the king instructed. Avon sank to his knees, arms stretched painfully by the short length of the chains. The girl clung to him tighter, squeezing his chest and pressing her head to his nape. See to their treatment. Separately, Prince Avon is to be sequestered to his chambers until further notice. He paused for a moment. When she is presentable, bring me the girl. And with that, the king turned on his heels and left. Avon listened to his heavy steps until they had faded completely. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Avon struck with his sword in a relentless flurry of flashing steel, but each attack was parried with ease. Mirabelle moved with the grace of a seasoned swordswoman, her red ponytail swinging and twirling as she defended. His final thrust, a mistake of the slightest overextension, cost him. The flat of her sword clanked him firmly on the top of his helm. While he had grown into a tall man of corded muscles, and boasted the harmonious balance of strength, height, and athleticism that came with young adulthood, she too had grown in her own ways. Though strong in her own right, she was but a whisper of his strength. But her finesse and agility came in astounding excess, and her immaculate technique not only negated his strength and reach advantage, it made him feel almost clumsy. Your feet slow. You move like pregnant dog, Mirabelle signed and stuck her pink tongue out playfully. He smiled back at her, baring his teeth. More than a decade had passed since their fateful meeting at the gallows, and at his side he had watched her grow into a woman, a Calamastian and Callipygian beauty with shining emerald eyes and rounded hips. Even through the black skull tattooed over her face, a measure taken by his father long ago to mar her beauty in an effort to make her undesirable to men, most notably, the prince, he thought she was the most beautiful woman he had ever met. Only the repercussions she would face from his father and from court if he dared show his affections kept him honest. But his desire for her had only grown as they had aged. They had formed a bond that the king himself could not break. And so Mirabelle the Ghoul had become known to all as the Hand of the Prince. He often dreamed of running away with her. After all, She was and always had been his closest friend and most loyal compatriot. Perhaps they would get the chance, one day, to rid themselves of titles and court and expectations. But I know something you don't, Avon replied. He lunged forward and once again steel rang upon steel. She dodged and parried and ducked and deflected and pirouetted until finally a hard and precise riposte knocked Avon to the ground. She came to stand over him with a wide, white-toothed smile. What not know, she signed and gave a muffled chuckle. You're easy to beat when you think you've won, he said. Before she could react, he swept her legs out from under her with his own and rolled over her into a mounted position where he pinned her wrists to the ground. She panted heavily, mouth agape and chest heaving, but she did not fight him. He stared into her eyes and for a moment became lost in the vast sea of red speckled green. Transfixed, he lowered his head. But no sooner had the thought entered his head than he heard footsteps approaching. Quickly he climbed to his feet and helped Mirabelle to hers. The king awaits, Lord Prince, said Malkov, one of the 5 generals. Only 1 week, the prince thought as he followed General Malkov. Only 1 week until the campaign begins. How much time would that allow him to be with Mirabelle, away from the court and his father, he wondered. Whatever time it allowed, it would not be enough. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The sounds of battle roared. Screams of death, echoes of clashing steel, and sickening thuds of heavy maces crushing plate helms surrounded him as he and Mirabelle and his army pushed forward in the final battle of the campaign, the death throes of Carter's eastern region's military might. Mirabelle fought at his side, sword and tabard bloodied. She moved through the crowd like a hero of legends, an untouchable and merciless tigress. His victory here, which now seemed inevitable, would win him the respect of his father and the love and adoration of the people of Pandamore. But he cared not about those things. The success of the campaign would bring him within reach of the one thing he truly wanted. Soaked in blood as he moved through fray, he almost smiled at the notion. The battle had turned, and the enemy was on its heels. Avon signaled his bannermen to initiate the 2 remaining cavalry units to strike the flanks of the retreating army. He refocused his attention to the battle, striding forward amongst the sea of his rushing soldiers. Something struck just below his neck, and his breath caught. He reached up to feel an arrow protruding from the riveted aventail. He felt a sudden wave of weakness and fell to his knee. He looked around but saw only his guardsmen who had encircled him protectively. As he fell to his back, Mirabelle forced her way through the small wall of soldiers. She threw aside her black and gold close helm as she wrapped her arms around him and pulled him onto her lap. Tears began to stream down her face, and her small body, beneath the fierce black and gold-plated armor, began to heave with sobs. She shook her head violently, red braid swinging wildly. "Cannot go," she signed passionately. "You are my whole heart." In a rudimentary way, her fragile voice had managed to speak the final word as she struck her chest with her fist. "You spoke," Avon said, a smile forming on his pallid, youthful face. She wiped the blood from his mouth. "I'm sorry, I waited too long," Avon said. "Damn the court. Damn my father. Damn 'em all." His eyes began to close, but his lips moved. "Kiss me, my heart," he whispered. She did not hesitate but closed her shining emerald eyes and kissed the prince. He was there for a moment, holding her head, then his hand fell limply to his side. She embraced him, refusing to let go, her sobs quick and gentle. The battle raged on, but it was as if it were 1,000 miles away.